back when we still lived in the city, 9/11 happened. And obviously I have 7-year-old, I have the mentality of a child. I could still almost put myself in my brain as a child still. And I feel like we don't give kids enough credit of the things that they really understand. And obviously from a different time, different generation, I was exposed to everything, literally everything. So I watched all the news that was breaking. I saw everything. This was at a different time, obviously. So Fox News was on the TV 24/7. It did not turn off. It was on. And at that time, they were filming like ground zero, like the digging and everything. That was live a lot of times. They would switch to live and they would give updates all the time. Every day we would go down to the corner store and we would grab the newspaper every morning and have the newspaper and just updates and stuff. So I was exposed to everything. Which if I could go back, I still would be, because it was the truth and things weren't sugar-coated. And I mean, I already knew what was going on.
Hi, I'm Joe Geidel. It's January 31st, 2024, and today I'm having a profound conversation with Tillie Geidel Conklin. Tillie is author of 9/11 Through the Eyes of a Daughter, where she bravely shares her experiences of the day as a tribute to her father, who heroically went to the World Trade Center to save as many lives as possible, but tragically lost his own in the process. This is an emotional conversation, so I want to thank Tillie for her time and for sharing her story. We hope that this conversation can help others out there with losses of their own. Tillie, how you doing today?
I'm pretty good besides my white hair.
Tillie and I were just talking about how her white hair should be seen as a sign of courage, a sign of aging and being proud. Really having that as like a badge of honor, in my opinion, at least. But I just want to start this interview off by saying thank you, number one. And also, just in the beginning here, I want to start off by letting the audience know that Tillie and I share the same last name, but we didn't always know each other. We met each other about I want to say 15 years ago. And since our last names are so uncommon, we kind of figured that we were related in some capacity. And over the years, we've become really good friends and have come to consider each other cousins and have had some really good times together. And it's been great. But it got me thinking about the idea of family and how family is so foundational in our lives and how family really comes to define us. So, Tillie, I just wanted to ask you, can you tell me a little bit about where you're from and just tell me a little bit about your family?
First of all, you're the coolest.
Thank you.
So I'm originally from Staten Island and I'm the only child. Lived with my mom and dad in Tottenville. I have my mom's side was the one that lived in the neighborhood, lived a couple blocks from us. So we were close with all my cousins. And we were looking in the summer 2001, looking to move from Staten Island to upstate. Not really, but 2 hours out of the city. So that was our whole thing. That's how I got here.
Cool. Do you have any memories about growing up with your cousins? I know you're very close with your cousins, or with your parents, or anything that stands out from when you were young?
Pretty much we spent all the holidays and all birthday parties and everything together. My family is very involved with each other. I always had a lot of nice times with my dad. We lived literally down the block from the beach. So we were on the beach all seasons. And that was always fun. That's we spent a lot of time outdoors because Staten Island that's kind of like the forgotten borough. It's not really city-like. I mean, now it is, but it wasn't. It was more woodsy. Yeah, but we spent a lot of time outdoors. He was really into outdoors. And pretty cool. There was woods down by the beach. And one of the times we were on a walk, we would go bird watching, all kinds of stuff outside. And one of the times we were on a walk, it was just me and him. And we came across this like opening in the woods, and he found 2 logs that were cut up from a tree. And we kind of rolled them over. We kind of made like this little secret spot in the woods. So it was so cute.
That's cool. And was with the woods being right there too, it kind of, I feel like it prepared the transition for you to eventually move upstate. Because, like obviously upstate where we are.
The woods.
Middle of the woods, exactly. Was there any particular reason why your family wanted to move from Staten Island, obviously very city-like, very urban, to the country where it's very rural?
So I am my dad's side. I'm 5th generation from Conville. So it's very, very different now than it was. And it was gradually changing. When my dad grew up there, he was born in the 50s. So it was very woodsy, completely different than now. And I think he just wanted to get out of the city and like really start a better life for us. So my mom is originally from Brooklyn, and she moved from Brooklyn to Queens to Staten Island. And then we finally made it completely out of the city to up here. But yeah, I think he kind of just wanted to retire and like start his new chapter in the woods, in the country, and just like take it very easy.
Was your mom cool with that? Were you cool with that moving from Staten Island? You were so young then, so you probably like don't remember that part, but like.
So I do remember when we were looking at houses, and originally I didn't want to move. One time we did have someone look at our house while we were like in the middle of this whole thing, and I was like, I don't want to get out of my house. I don't want to move. This whole thing. But I always wanted to live on a farm, and it's so weird because I went through like these tubs that have like my old schoolwork and stuff in it from when I lived down there, and like I always drew farms and that I wanted to live on a farm and I wanted to live in the woods, and it's so funny. And now I'm in the woods with my goat.
Want to tell me a little bit about all the animals you have? Because you got like a ton. You have a farm now.
I have Nibbles, which is my crazy, insane goat. He's supposed to be a miniature goat. He definitely is not. He hangs out with the goose, the very dangerous goose. And we have the cows roaming, which aren't mine, but they're the neighbors. I love them. And my mom has her fun tortoises. And I have my dogs, my Dalmatian and my Jack Russell, my babies.
Those tortoises are so cool too. I mean, like, do you guys know how old they are? I feel like they got to be like really old.
I don't know. I think the bigger one is like way older. But yeah, oh my gosh, they're gonna live a very long time.
No, yeah, that makes sense. That would be the bigger one would be the older one.
Yeah.
So, like, what are some things that you do for fun, kind of things to unwind and relax? I know that we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that. You wrote a book. Right. Is writing something that you enjoy doing? Does that bring you comfort? What are some things that bring you comfort?
So when I wrote my book, it was kind of like a therapeutic thing that I was going through. So I don't necessarily like sit there and write, but I'll keep like a book of like dreams that I have and stuff like that. It was very therapeutic in a way. It was very hard, but it was very therapeutic when I went over everything with the book. Things I love to do though for fun. I love being outdoors still, hiking, going on trails and all that stuff. And then just like spending time with my friends and family. I just love it. And my dogs.
Same. I mean, I think we got a lot in common. I love like going out and hiking and really taking advantage of what we got up here with all the mountains and everything. It's great to be outside.
Yeah, we need to go hiking more.
Hiking everywhere. Yeah, especially your property too. You got a ton of it, so you're good. But I wanted to talk a little bit about your book and how you kind of went through the experiences that you had back 20 or so years ago. And yeah, can you just kind of walk me through the process of why you decided to write the book and why you felt it was necessary?
So this was a plan that I've had like, oh my gosh, maybe like 14 years old, something like that. So this was something that I wanted to do. I didn't really know if I was ever going to actually go through with it or not. Around 16, I kind of like started writing a little bit, and then my computer crashed, and then that was that. But it was something that I always wanted to do. And I always had the name of the book too. I always knew I wanted to be 9/11 through the eyes of a daughter. I always knew that. Then as the 20th anniversary started approaching, I'm like, what? I'm going to do it. It's time. And it's time. So I took a notebook and I jotted down different stories that I want to tell and kind of made groups. I was like, I went over like my dad's life, and I was like, but it's not just going to be 9/11. I'm going to start it out with his whole life. And writing the book was very hard because it was therapeutic in one way, but it was very emotional. And it's like a shorter book because I could not go on any longer. Every time I'd read the different pages to do editing and stuff, I was bawling my eyes out the whole time. So it was too hard to keep going on. And then I just went over it. I wanted to do it my own way. That's why I self-published. I wanted it all done my own way. I wanted control over everything. And I kind of wanted to keep it a little bit low-key, but I guess not. And then I went through all the pictures, which thankfully my family has always been big on taking pictures. So I went through hundreds of pictures, and a lot of the pictures I never shared before because I share a lot of pictures and things on Facebook, keeping his memory. And a lot of those pictures I didn't share. At one section of the book is a lot of writing, and the other end of the book is just hundreds of pictures. And that in itself tells its own story too. And now it's just out there in history. And I think if anyone, I think the best person to really hear from when it comes to like 9/11 and all of that is definitely the family members, to really get the story of each individual person. I really wish that there were stories for every single person out there, different books for every single person that passed that day, because everyone has their own story. So it's very important.
So, talking about your dad, is fifth generation, Staten Island, New York City, born and bred. Can you tell me just a little bit about him and some of the things that he experienced growing up and how he, came to be the man that he was?
So my dad was born in 1956 in Tottenville, Staten Island. He started off very young. I'm like, how could someone accomplish so much in 44 years? Very short life. So much accomplished. Oh my gosh. He played baseball and football as a kid. He was in the Eagle Scouts. He went from the bottom to an Eagle Scout leader. Just all these things. Always helping, always giving. His dad was a fireman, so that's kind of where that whole thing came from. His dad was a fireman in the firehouse that he was lost in, so in Rescue 1. My grandfather was a lieutenant of Rescue 1, so my dad is pretty cool. Grew up around the same firehouse that I did. So he went to the same Christmas parties, all the same stuff that I experienced when I was a kid also. So that's pretty cool. He was the oldest of 4 kids. 2 brothers and a sister. And yeah, he just grew up in a little town, stayed there. He left for the Marines. He was in the Marines actually longer than I knew. He served his 4 years and then he was out and did, reserves for a few years while he was on the list to join the fire department. Then he went and he graduated from the fire academy in 1979, and then he got onto the fire department in 1981.
So when your dad was a Marine, was he involved in any wars in particular? Like, was he in Persian Gulf War, or like what was his time like when he was a Marine?
So when he joined the Marines, he joined at the time where Vietnam was going on. So I assume that he thought that he was going into Vietnam, and wound up, as soon as he graduated, Vietnam stopped. It ended as soon as he graduated. So I think that when he joined, he assumed it was him and a group of his friends, my uncle, his brother, and just a group of their friends. They were like, okay, we're all going to join the Marines. And they all went and they joined together. And I think that they all assumed that they were going into Vietnam because that was what was going on at the time. And when he graduated the boot camp, Vietnam had just ended.
So, I mean, that's a super selfless thing to do if you think about it. I mean, it's pretty well. I mean, I think if we were to define your dad's life in many ways, it would be one of selflessness. Because he went, and I was thinking he was going to go into Vietnam, which was I knew was super dangerous to go there. And then he gets out, and then after he serves his time in the Marines, he becomes a firefighter. And I know that your family, your dad's side of the family in particular, had a tradition of being firefighters, serving there. So can you tell me a little bit about his time as a firefighter?
Yeah, so one really cute story of my dad when he was little, though, what my grandfather would do, like fire safety training for the house to like how to escape. And my dad, they did like a little bit of drills, and my dad was always scared as a little boy to go down the ladder out the window. But my dad joined in 1981. He got on in ladder 11 in Midtown, Alphabet City in Manhattan, Alphabet City. And at that time, they called it the war years in the fire department because the city was just burning. It was crazy. It was very busy. And he was in ladder 11 for almost 10 years. And I actually they had a surprise ceremony for me past April to present me this guitar. And my dad's captain from ladder 11 actually surprised me. He was there, and he said that he was sorry to hear my dad go because he wanted to go to a rescue. And he said that he wrote up a recommendation. He said to his best of his recollection, that was the best that he ever wrote for anyone, the recommendation. And then he said too that he was a captain to about 25 firemen, and any day he would take like 25 Garys. So that was so sweet. But he wound up going from ladder 11 to rescue 5. He was there for about 2 years, a little less, and then he finally went to rescue 1. And he was there a little over 10 years. He did 20 years on.
So where was Rescue 1 located?
Rescue 1 is in Midtown Manhattan, and Rescue 5 is in Staten Island.
Okay. Is there any particular reason why you went from Staten Island, which was local, to Manhattan?
So I think his ultimate goal was to go to Rescue 1 just because he liked the fire. And that was the firehouse that he grew up in. And his ultimate thing was to get there, I believe. And it's so funny because his badge number, every fireman gets a badge number, and his is 1915. And I assume that he chose that because that was the date that Rescue 1 was founded, the year 1915, which is so crazy.
So he obviously like really understood the history about all that too. So that's pretty cool. So he's really ingrained in the whole firefighting fireman culture as well. So
yeah, he grew up around that, and his brother wound up getting into that firehouse later on. So they worked together. And yeah, he just grew up. He did ride-alongs with my grandfather when he was a kid. That's what he grew up around. That was their life.
So obviously with your father, time went on and he's getting ready to retire, right? Do you want to take me through because that must have been a very pivotal time. You guys were getting ready to move upstate, and he was getting ready to retire. And obviously there's a lot of stuff going on. You were young kids, so I'm sure there was a lot going on with that as well. So can you walk me through kind of what went down when it came to right around when he was going to retire, the events of that day?
So he decided he was thinking about becoming a lieutenant. And then he decided that he did want to retire, and it was perfect. I was still pretty young, so he would have been retired and home all the time. And he just wanted to do his 20 years and spend time with the family and be out. So he was doing a lot of overtime. The way it was set up back then, I'm not sure about now, but back then the way it was set up, you do a lot of overtime and rack up your pension. So he was just doing a lot of overtime. And the day of 9/11, he wasn't supposed to work. So school had just started. I went to school. September 10th, I was at school. He was at work. He came home from work. I came home from school. We had dinner. Everything was great. He was supposed to be off the next day. My parents were acting funny, and they were dancing through the rooms to Irish music and this whole thing. And they were just having fun. And then the firehouse called, and my mom answered, and they told her that they had overtime for him. And she was kind of upset about it because he had to keep working, and she just wanted him to be home. And he told her, don't worry, he only has to work a few more tours, and then he's going to be home, and he knows what's best for his family. It'll be okay. So he wound up taking overtime for the morning of 9/11. So fast forward that night, he would read to me every night. So he read me a few pages out of the book he was reading to me at the time. And I fell asleep next to him because I was an only child and a daddy's girl. So I was still in the bed, and I fell asleep and woke up the next day. And I was never awake when my dad would leave for work. That was kind of odd because he would leave before I woke up, and then I'd just see him when he got home from work. So he was running late, and my mom sent him to the corner store to grab her some milk. He wound up coming back. I was standing on my front stoop, and he hugged and kissed my mom and I goodbye. He walked up to the gate to leave, and he turned around and he looked back at us, and he walked back to us and gave us another hug and kiss, which was kind of odd. Then he got into his van, and he drove away, and I was waving to him, and I watched him drive away. And that was the last time I saw him. I wound up getting ready for school. Mom walked me up the block to my school. My school is at the end of the block, so it was walking distance. So we walked to the school. I wasn't in class very long, and the students kept getting called down to the office. And I was like, this is so weird. And kids just kept getting called down, and they were leaving. They're going to the office. I was like, I wonder if I'm going to be called next. And sure enough, I was called next. And I thought I was going on a camping trip because they were talking about camping not very long before this. So I get my stuff. I'm on like the third floor. So I'm going down the stairwell. And when I get to the bottom of the stairs, there's a little window on the door. And I saw at the window that the whole hallway, there was like the office over here, and there's like two openings to the office. It was completely packed and flooded through the hallway of like pretty much mainly moms. And I was just standing there, and I was like looking around. I had no clue what was going on. My mom was frantic. She grabbed me. She pulled me out of the school. We got into the car with my neighbor, and we drove up the block. We get to her house. My grandmother's already there with my cousin Peter. We go into the living room, and that's when I saw the planes hit the World Trade Center. They replayed it. And even though how young I was 2 months from 7, I knew exactly what was going on. Peter was a month from 4, and he knew exactly what was going on. Even though you think that kids are so young, they understand to an extent. But I knew what was going on, and I was horrified. And then no one exactly told me what was happening. I saw the news, and then I gathered from the talk of everyone. When I crossed the street of my house, people were gathering. Like, there were neighbors and friends and family and just everyone. The door was open. There were people all through my yard, through my house, and there were just no answers. So my mom's sister is a cop at the time, and her precinct was 11 minutes from my dad's firehouse. So they would meet up at calls a lot. And she wound up, there was a rookie at the time, and when they got the call, he wanted to go on the ride along because he wanted to take her place, go on the ride along, see what's going on. And she was like, no. He's like, please let me go. He wants to go. So she's like, fine, you can go. And he wound up going, and they wound up getting killed. And she had a cell phone, which wasn't very common, obviously. My dad had a cell phone too, but his cell phone was out of minutes. So Mom, rewind a little bit with her story. She wound up calling the firehouse that morning just to say hello to him when he got in. And he wasn't in yet. And whoever was on the phone at the firehouse she was probably the last person that he ever spoke to. And he's like, no, Tillie, he's not in yet. I'll have him call you when he gets in, blah, blah, blah. So they hang. A couple minutes pass. Rescue 1 was one of the first firehouses that was called down. So he did not get in yet. And my grandmother calls my mom and tells her, oh my God, turn on the news. Like, what's going on? Blah, 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 blah. This was when the first towers hit. The second towers hit live. They saw what happened. And they were like, this is not an accident. This is a terrorist attack. So she hung up with my grandmother. She called the firehouse. No answer. This was literally minutes. No answer. She gets on the phone with my aunt, which is the cop. She asked her, have you seen Gary? What's going on? She's like, no, I haven't seen Gary, blah, blah, blah. They're kind of back and forth on the phone. Mom gets me out of school because they think that the schools are going to be under attack next. Because we're in the city, we're in Staten Island, we're right across from Manhattan. So they don't know what's going on. There's no clue of what could happen next. And so she races up to school, gets me, and then that's when I see what happens, and I kind of gather what's going on from everyone else. Now, my aunt was on the phone with my mom, and she's down there, and she's like, I'm going to find Gary, blah, 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 and wind up, she saw the tower collapse. And people were screaming, and she had to hang up with my mom. And from what she told me was everyone was frantic. They were running around the streets, and she was talking to all kinds of cops and firemen on the street. And she told them that my brother, Gary, he's a fireman. Can you find him? And then firemen wound up coming up to her, and they're like, you're the cop that's looking for her brother. Don't worry, we're going to find him. We have him on the list. So they were searching for him. So at this point, everything's down. There's no cell phone towers. There's no signal for anything. And that was going down in Manhattan. Back at home, there were little to no answers, and everyone was just gathering in my house and like praying and stuff. The night got later, and my uncle and my aunt comes down. My uncle was the fireman. He was off that day, and he worked with my dad. My aunt comes down, and all people from the neighborhood and stuff, they knew that my dad was missing. So they came across the street from our house, and they kind of had like a little like visual thing. They had like candles and little American flags and stuff. And they were gathered outside of my house, and everyone was just like hugging us and crying. And that day was the first time I've ever had a panic attack before. And I remember I was sitting on the couch and I was crying, and I was like, I want my daddy. And I was just like hyperventilating. And they had us, my grandmother, my mom, and I were all freaking out. And they had us walk from the end of the block to the other end and back to try to get us to like start breathing. So fast forward to that night, my mom is pacing through the bedroom. She's crying into my dad's shirt that he wore from the night before. And I'm laying in bed with my grandmother, and we're just laying there weak. And she's praying with me. And then I hear a car pull up, and my mom goes. So I look out the window, which is facing the street, and I see over the street light, the lamp, a cop car pulls up. And it wound up being my aunt, and then her and my mom, that lock in a hug, and they're hugging and they're crying because they knew that she would have been lost that day too, and that she still didn't hear from my dad, and he's still missing. So that was the first day.
When you think about these experiences that you had when you were so young, is it still as powerful as it was back then, the memories?
Yeah.
And when you were writing your book, obviously, did the process help you deal with some of these emotions and try to experience them in possibly like healthier ways?
It is still as powerful as it was then, and still as vivid in my mind. I have like a really good memory, and especially like something traumatic. It all depends. Some people have memory loss because of it, and some people have like really good memory of things that happened to them. It kind of just varies with person. But yeah, when I was writing the book, it was a mixture of really hard and also therapeutic, where I felt like I was finally doing this. I was getting this out there. I've always shared about his life online and everything. I always have made posts about him and things like that, and just sharing his life. But I was like, this is a book. This is solid. This is going out there, and this is going to be out there in history forever. And it's so weird thinking that we're already on the next generation of kids that they don't know. They were born. It's crazy. They were born and they're old, and I'm old. But yeah, it was therapeutic, but it was also hard. But it feels like it did help me somewhat in a way.
So what's super important to get you through times like that, I'm sure, is a support system. And many times for us, that's could be our families. Mm-hmm. So how important was your family going through this time to help process your feelings and support you?
Oh my God, the most important thing in the world. My family all came together, and we're all like one. We were very close to begin with, and my dad was like the one person in the family that could do no wrong. I mean, like, he really didn't anyway. He was kind of the rock of it, and then we lost him. He's missing, and everyone came together. Everyone supported each other because we were all struggling. Mom and I, obviously, the hardest. And then it was so hard for everyone else. He just was such a big part of everyone's lives. And it was,
No, I got you. And so you were down in Staten Island when that happened, and you had the plan of eventually moving upstate, which you ultimately did. But how difficult must that have been, actually going from leaving the city, leaving your home? Plan was to move upstate with you and your mom and yourself and be up there and be happy together. And then ultimately, that didn't pan out, but you did decide to move together with your mom upstate. And was that challenging? How was it going through that?
So this happened. First, we picked up the house. The house was set. We were supposed to be selling our house on Staten Island and moving upstate. He was retiring in 2 weeks, and it was all falling into place where we would sell the house on Staten Island and move up here and be in this house. And then eventually the rest of the family would follow. My grandparents and my aunt, uncle, and cousins and everyone would follow, and we would all move together. So tragedy struck. Didn't know what was happening, what was going on. And finally, after a few months, my mom made the decision. So she called the woman that we were going to buy the house from. At this point, it's September. It's kind of, and so she talks to the woman. She says, okay, Gary was involved in this. And the lady was just like, oh my God, this whole thing. And they went over a discussion. Would you still like to move here? And they discussed, winter's coming, all this stuff's coming. This woman was supposed to be moving to France with her son. So she said, winter's coming. How about I stay here through the winter, and come spring, I'm going to move. And then that's when you take the house. My dad's still missing. We're still going through all this stuff. We don't know what's going on. And so that's what happened. Come spring, we started coming upstate and clearing out the house. So she was this very artsy ballerina woman, Mrs. Dippenois. And so she moved to France with her son, and she wound up leaving the house completely furnished. So we had a lot of work to do. Besides, it was a fixer-upper farmhouse to begin with. So we had a lot of work to do with the house. So my mom and her sister, my aunt, and our cousins came up here, and we would start, and we had dumpsters, and we were getting rid of stuff. But we did not move up here until the end of October 2002. So that was very hard. Very hard. What wound up happening was my grandparents wound up buying a house right around the corner. They wound up moving around the corner, and then my aunt and uncle wound up getting a house 7 minutes away, and my cousins moved over there. So we all wound up moving together. And then fast forward many years later, my aunt finally, the one that was cop, finally moved up here. And then she was still a cop, so she would just commute to the city. And it was really hard making that decision to move here, but it was what he wanted. He was ready to leave, my dad. And we were in the position to be able to still keep the house on Staten Island for time being. We sold the house when I was 18. Sandy hit, wound up not taking the house, which was a gift from God, literally right down our block. Houses were wiped out into the ocean. It hit the city really hard. and wound up our house was untouched. And there was a lot of bad stuff going on, people robbing us and things like that with our house. And wound up, it was time that we had to sell. And actually selling the house was worse than moving, because I always knew that I could go back to the house. And selling the house, it still messes with me. That was one of the hardest things. It was like literally losing a family member.
Well, I'm sure in some ways, losing the house was kind of like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but was it kind of like losing your dad all over again in a way?
I would say so. I haven't really told anyone this so much, but I've had like dreams about the house and nightmares almost every single night since we sold the house. And we sold the house like 11 years ago now. And it was like I was losing my dad all over again, because he had that house when he just got out of the Marines, and he got that house. And it was a bungalow, and he wound up in 94 putting the second story on the house, redoing the whole house himself because they were pregnant with me. And that was him. He built all that. And I know you really like history, so this is pretty cool and really weird. I wouldn't say cool. It's kind of cool that I came across this, but it's also really strange. There's a historical page for Tauntonville on Facebook a few years ago, and they posted an old picture of my house, and a girl said that she grew up there. Well, obviously like an older woman. And I kind of went back and forth with her because I never met anyone else that lived there before. So she wound up living there right before my dad. And then her mother sold it to a man, and then the man sold it to my dad. He kind of did like a flip thing, I guess. So I said, my dad, I grew up there. My dad put the second story of the house, this whole thing. I saw this woman. She had no idea about me or my family or my story or anything like that. So she told me, I explained it to her. She told me that her mom was a widow who lived in that house with her, and her name is Charlotte, and her mother's name is Tillie. And I was like, oh my gosh, my mom is Tillie and I'm Tillie. My mom was a widow, but my middle name is Charlotte. I'm Tillie Charlotte. It was the creepiest thing. It was so weird.
That's a crazy coincidence. Oh my God.
Right?
It makes you think like, I don't know, that's too strange for it to be a coincidence in a way.
Right?
Yeah. Wow. Jeez. Well, so you end up moving upstate, and during this entire process, so you said October 2002, I mean, your father is still missing. How were you able to, when you ended up moving upstate, how were you able to process that? And was there ever a point where you really like started to come to terms? When was that point? And it was obviously, you always want to keep hope alive. That's very important. And I'm sure as a young child, you're like, that's super important with helping you cope. Exactly. So how did you process those feelings when you moved upstate, and as time slowly started to march on? When did you come to a realization about the reality of things?
So back when we still lived in the city, 9/11 happened, and obviously I have 7-year-old. I have the mentality of a child. I could still almost put myself in my brain as a child still, and I feel like we don't give kids enough credit of the things that they really understand. And obviously from a different time, different generation, I was exposed to everything, literally everything. So I watched all the news that was breaking. I saw everything. This was at a different time, obviously. So Fox News was on the TV 24/7. It did not turn off. It was on. And at that time, they were filming like ground zero, like the digging and everything. That was live a lot of times. They would switch to live and they would give updates all the time. Every day we would go down to the corner store and we would grab the newspaper every morning and have the newspaper and just update and stuff. So I was exposed to everything. Which if I could go back, I still would be, because it was the truth and things weren't sugar coated. And I mean, I already knew what was going on. So I still had the thought process of a child, though, in a different way, where I thought that my dad was surviving and my mom thought my dad was surviving also. And she kind of called this like her safety bubble, where it was almost like God was protecting her, where she didn't know like completely how, like she knew it was horrific, but like how bad it is really underneath, where there really isn't any survivors. And what wound up happening was the next day, they wind up announcing that there were survivors. So we were hugging and crying, and my mom just kept saying, if anyone can survive it, it's him. He was a Eagle Scout, he was a Marine, he was a rescueman. If anyone can survive, it's him. And every day we would get down and we would pray a couple times a day on the ottoman in our living room. And she would just pray like that he could get a hold of water if like a pipe was busted or something. And so we would pray about those sort of things. So in my mind, I was picturing him like underneath rubble, but that he could be surviving off of water or something like that. And my mom really came to terms with it after a while. Time kept passing. And I just was recently thinking about something where obviously it wasn't true and it wasn't a rational way of thinking, but it was a child. And I remember on Christmas Eve, and there was a little bit of snow, not so much, but it was flurrying. And we were getting ready to go to my grandmother's house for Christmas. And I remember saying to myself, like, he must be cold under there. And obviously thinking back, it's very sad. And obviously he couldn't have survived that long. But as a kid, I was thinking that. And as time went on, then they announced the ending of the cleanup. And I've talked about this a little bit. I knew that I really came to terms with him being gone when we had his memorial service. I really came to terms that he was gone. I had the idea that he was probably gone a lot, like just back and forth. Like he could be alive. Maybe he's not. There's just no answers. And I was getting bullied in school when I went back to school finally. And so many kids just kept telling me, your dad is dead. Your dad's dead. I'm just like, thinking back, where would they even hear that stuff from? From their parents. So that was a whole thing. And I finally came to terms with it completely, I would say, when we had his memorial service, which was August 2002. But before that, I knew he was gone. And he just didn't come home. And I would say all the time, like, when he comes home, I would think, like, he was going to be covered in soot. And, like, just, I understood, but not completely, where I still thought that he could have been surviving. And then time goes on, and it's still, sometimes I feel like it gets harder.
What makes the situation even more tragic is they've never found any remains. Do you hold out hope that one day they'll find something? I know that they have like a database of unidentified, like DNA and stuff. Do you have hope that they'll be able to match something one day?
I do. When I was 7, they took my DNA sample because I'm the only person that on the face of the earth that came from him. So they took my DNA sample, and then my grandfather and my uncles gave their DNA sample. They took my mom's DNA sample. That way they could kind of just figure out exactly what his DNA is. And so actually last week, they wound up identifying someone. So I always have the hope that at some point there will be something. And one of my friends, he lost his dad 9/11, and he shared his experience with me about when they found his dad. Weirdly enough, they found his dad on my dad's birthday. And yeah. And he shared his experience with me. I don't know how he could have went through that. Like, I can't even imagine that part.
So you said in school you were getting bullied, which blows my mind because, like, how could anyone, like, bully someone after their parent was involved in such a tragedy? But did you know of any other people back then who were affected by 9/11? Was there anyone else in your school whose parents or loved ones also were lost?
So at the time, I actually talked about this not too long ago, where they should have, I mean, no one was expecting that to happen, but they kind of should have put the kids together that happened to, because we had something in common. But I assume that Pete Davidson was in my school because he lived in the same neighborhood at one point. I think he was my neighbor all the way down the block. So I'm sure he was in the same school. And I actually think that I wound up finding out later on that a kid in my class, I believe, that his mom was one of the office workers. But at the time, I was kind of like singled out. I don't even really know how all the kids found out. I think just from their parents talking from a small neighborhood. And they just had a fest.
What do you mean by that? They had a fest. What does that mean?
They had like a tormenting fest. They just it was really hard. They just like kept telling me your dad's dead and like just like crazy things. And it's like, how could children act like that? And I wound up not telling my mom about this. And she wound up finding out one day when we're on our way to school. And she's like, does anyone say anything to you about what happened? And I said, yeah. She's like, what did they say to you? And she's like, I told her, I was like, they say that my dad is dead. And she was like, and then she kind of talked to me a little bit about it, and she really held her composure. She went to the school and she's like, you need to correct those kids now, or I'm going to correct their parents. And the teacher, very surprisingly, said that their kids are kids. They can't really do it. And then she's like, you need to correct them, or I'm like correcting their parents. So that was a whole thing.
And knowing your mom too, I know she probably let the Staten Island out. She's oh wow, oh my god. Do you feel a kinship with the other kids of 9/11, if I could put it that way, like the other kids that lost parents in 9/11? Like, do you like keep in contact with other people? Have you reached out? How has the community been when it comes to healing and continuing on?
So I've reached out to different kids here and there. Some connect, some kind of standoffish. Pretty good for the most part. There's a group that we have on Facebook for the widowers, and the children. So it's just like anyone needs to vent or anything like that. And then I wound up making a friendship with one of the fireman's sons, and he's very down to earth. We could just talk about whatever. And it's someone that completely understands like what I've been through and go through on like that level. Because it's a very weird thing. It's not a common thing. You can connect with people on one level when they lose their parents. And then there's just like all these other different things to it.
Speaking of connecting with people, are you in contact at all with other people that were firefighters that your dad was friends with?
Yeah, I come across people on Facebook, actually. All different firehouses that he's been in 3 firehouses. I have made friends with people from all his different firehouses. That I still talk to some of the guys in Rescue 1. I have them on my Facebook. A couple guys from Rescue 5, and then guys that he was friends with in Rescue 1. Even sometimes I come across people that he was in the military with. Like, it's pretty cool.
So you were mentioning before how in 2002 you went down for the memorial service. Obviously, there's been many services since then. It's been over 20 years now. Have you been down? I know you have, but can you tell me the experiences of what it's like going down to the memorial and participating in those remembrance events?
So in 2002 is when we held his memorial service on Staten Island. Like, since we couldn't have like a funeral, we had his memorial service on Staten Island. And we had it outdoors like he would love at Snug Harbor, where we spent a lot of time together. I went down to the memorial for the first time in 2021. So I went back to his firehouse the first time since in 2021. I went back to his firehouse the first time, and I would say since like 2004. Like, I didn't go back for a very long time. The city is not one of my things. I love the city in a way of visiting, but it's also very hard. Manhattan. So I decided, even after the book, I was kind of on this mission for myself also, where I need to do these things and I need to push myself. And I told myself, you're going to say yes to everything. You're going to do this. And I went down there. I went down to the firehouse for the first time. That was very hard. I cried and cried. And I had like a mental list of things that I wanted to do. And one of them was saying his name at a ceremony. Went down to the firehouse and said his name for the ceremony. It was not my thing. I don't like public speaking. And then I went to the memorial for the first time. And it was so beautiful and it was crazy. I kind of walked up there and I was just looking and I was just there. Like, I wasn't sure where it was, and then I was just there. And I just look out and there's like the water flowing and it's so beautiful, but it's so like eerie and like you feel the sorrow at the same time. And about my pennies. And so
tell me a little bit about the pennies from heaven. What is that all about?
So when we lived on Staten Island, my dad would give me a penny every time we went to the conference house. There was a wishing well, and he would give me a penny to throw in the well and make a wish. That's my story with him and the pennies. With my mom, when they went on their first date, he stopped to get gas, and he was like cleaning his windshield, and she took the change out of his little change holder, pulled the penny out, and then rolled down the window and stuck it out the window, and he opened his hand. She stuck the penny in his hand like she was tipping him. And that was kind of their joke from there on out. And they did that all the time they were together. So that's like the pennies from both of us. Fast forward, I find pennies from heaven. They'll be the weirdest places. They just appear. It's so weird. And sometimes it'll be like 9/11. I'll find a penny from 2001. My birthday, I'll find a penny from 1994, the year I was born. I found one Father's Day, I found a penny from 1911. It's just like, yeah, it's so weird. So I go to the site, which when I got to the firehouse, I was there for the first time in forever, and I cried the whole time. And I walk into the kitchen. I was the first person there because I got there very early. And I sat down, and Nick was like, my husband, he was like, listen to what's playing. And I was like, yeah, I know the song. And he's like, no, like, listen what's playing. And it was Waltzing Matilda. I was like, oh my God, because my full name's Matilda. I was like, that song doesn't just play. And so I'm sitting there and I'm crying because Waltzing Matilda's playing. And Nick's like, look down. And I was like, and there's a dime. Now, sometimes I will find the dime and then the penny, or the penny and then the dime, because it's 11. So I found the dime and I was like, this is my dime. I'm going to find the penny to this later. So fast forward, we go down to his name. I'm looking for my penny all over the ground. I do not see it. I was crying. I couldn't find his name. A fireman we made eye contact, and he was like, are you okay? And I said, no, I can't find my dad. And he was like, what company is he with? And I said, Rescue One. He's like, your dad's company is next to mine. He walks me over. He explained to me that he lost everyone in his company that day. He was the only one that wasn't lost. And he's like, do you want me to pray with you? And I was like, yeah. And we all like held hands and he prayed. And I was like, I feel like I was meant to meet you. Like, I explained to him, I was like, my dad was a Christian man. And then I became a Christian, like after 9/11 really built my faith and everything. And I was like, I really felt like this was meant to happen. And so that whole experience was crazy. I'm feeling my dad's name, and what I wanted to do was feel his name. That's all I wanted to do at some point in time. And I finally did it. I was rubbing his name. I was crying over it. And I was really like crying, like just sorrow. And I felt this, like, I can't explain it, but this overwhelming feeling of him almost like through me. It was the craziest thing. I've never even felt that before. And I'm crying. And again, Nick is there. The penny wasn't there because I was looking for it. He's like, look down. I was like, what? And I actually went live on Facebook because I was like, this is crazy. And I'm like sobbing, and there's my penny.
So from the actual day of 9/11 to when you were down at the memorial,
Okay.
was a very important part of coping and dealing with things and emotions. You want to tell me a little bit about your faith and how that has played a role?
Yeah, so my dad was a Christian man, and we were supposed to be moving and all that. And he started talking about how he wants us to start going to church as a family. This whole thing didn't get to happen, but wound up, when that happened, it really grew my mom's faith. And that's where she was finding comfort. And she's like, there has to be answers. There has to be more than, like, she always believed in Jesus and in God. But she's like, wow, there's so much more to this. And she just opened up the Bible and she was like reading these things. And she's like, there is like life after death. There's like all this stuff to it. It's not just, you don't just die and you're gone. And that really gave her so much hope. And she shared that with me. And that really just kept us going. And then through the years, that is the base of my life, of what keeps me going and really just gives me comfort that I know that someday I will see him again. And that's what I cling to. That's what I hold on to. That's what gives me comfort. And then the special kind of thing where, like, through God, I get signs. Like, it's amazing.
Amen to that. I totally agree with all that, for sure. So obviously, religion and Christianity, spirituality has helped your mom process these events.
Mm-hmm.
walk me a little bit through how your mom has processed all of this? Obviously, this had to be extremely tragic and I can't even imagine how hard on her. What has been her process? Just an overall, this is so much, obviously. Yeah. But like over the years, how has she learned to heal? How has her process been?
So she is just still clinging to Jesus, and it's just helping her. I say that we pretty much just take it day by day. It really is just, some days are way harder than others. Sometimes it just hits you like a train. Same thing with me. And that's the good thing with this podcast too, is that so people understand too that even though we're going on 20 something years, it still does affect people every single day. And it still affects her every day. And she just keeps it day by day. And the summer is really hard. Holidays are hard. And the same thing with me. And when the summer starts coming and I feel it, really emotional, and it's hard. I start getting hives from it.
So I know a big person in your life who has definitely helped as time has gone on, has been a partner for you through every step of the way, has been your husband, Nick. Do you want to tell me a little bit about him and how you got to know him and a little bit about your guys' story together?
So Nick and I met through mutual friends through MySpace. So we hung out with the same kids, and we kind of just like started talking through MySpace, and then we talk on the phone, and we wound up meeting up one of our friends' houses, and it was history from there. We wound up together from him. He was 12 and I was 14. And we've been together ever since, and he helps me through it all.
What year was that?
Support system. 2009.
Wow. Okay. Here you go.
So funny enough is Nick and I talked throughout the summer and everything, 9, and we got to know each other on the phone and stuff. We had the same friends, but we didn't hang out and actually meet in person until 11/9/09, and it was my parents' wedding anniversary.
All these signs are just so wild, right? Oh my gosh. So what are some goals? What are some life goals that you guys have together? What are things that you want to see? Because obviously you guys are so young still. So like, what do you want to build together?
I don't know. My ultimate goal in life, the same thing with him, is just a simple life, happiness, peace. That's all I want. It's just a simple life that's just happy, and try to live life to the complete fullest.
For sure. I totally agree with that. That's a good goal. So you wrote the book, and when did you write the book? When did it come out?
In 2021.
Okay. 21. Gotcha. And you said that, okay. You said there was so much in there there was so much to write about that you didn't write all of it.
Yeah.
What are some things that you wish you could have written about if you're now looking back at it? Or do you think it's perfect the way it is? Or is there any other pieces that you would want to add to it?
I probably would have added some more stories of like signs, some more stories or different people I've met because of 9/11, just like weird experiences that are obviously God sent, things like that I could have added into there. But it was so hard to just keep going with it.
Do you think you'll ever write a part 2?
I thought about it. I did think about it. It crosses my mind sometimes about maybe a book about signs. That has crossed my mind. And the other thing that's crossed my mind is maybe a children's book about loss, but that's a very touchy thing. And that may not happen. It's just something that I've been thinking about for a long time also.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a super important kind of book to write about. Specifically, a book targeted children. Exactly. In a way, do you identify with young people, young kids that have gone through tragedies, not necessarily 9/11, but also other tragedies as well? Is that like something that you connect with?
I think so. When I see things where kids, military-wise, because like I lost my dad in a terrorist attack, and ultimately he went in and he responded as if he was responding like a soldier, I think of them, where they were going in and they knew that they were responding to a terrorist attack. They knew that they were going in a terrorist attack, and that's the kind of way that they were responding. And I think of children when like they lose their police parents, their firefighter parent. And I always feel for kids, like their dad was the fireman. And it always hits home when I see that, not obviously like cops, firemen, military, but it always hits home a lot when I see firemen killed in the line of duty. It always hits me. And I think of their children and what they're going through. And in my mind, obviously, I'm a 29-year-old, but at the same time, I can put myself into my like little girl self of how I view the world. And like to me, I only had the little girl relationship with my dad. So that's what it's always going to be. And I feel like I connect with them in a way when it comes to that. And I just want to help the kids maybe with a book where they know that they're not alone, but it's also a very touchy thing. So I'm still not sure about that, but that's something that's crossed my mind quite a few times.
So obviously writing this book helped you deal with a lot of feelings and was a very therapeutic process. What are some other things in life that make you happy that you love to do?
I love spending time with my dogs. But yeah, just same kind of thing that I've always loved, spending time outdoors. I love being outside. That's why I hate the winter. And yeah, just spending time with my family, with my friends. It's just making plans, doing fun stuff, being outdoors, all that.
Now, I do have to say, just so the audience knows, that you have an awesome sense of music. That's great. Yeah, that, and I know that you got a really impressive VHS collection too, and all things 90s. Yeah.
I love that stuff. That stuff always makes me so happy. I like to pretend that I live in the 90s and the 80s.
That's cool. Is there any reason why? Like, do you just like that kind of like style? Do you like the kind of like films and like art that came out during that time?
Yeah, it's like all of it and the like nostalgia. And it's almost like, I feel like that stuff brings me comfort too, because it brings me back to such like a simpler time in my life and in the world.
Yeah, I feel like it's before everything got really complicated. And, yeah, I mean, right around that time, like 2001, I feel like 9/11 in many ways actually like was the end of the 20th century. And like that was like, I feel.
I love that you say that. I always, sorry to cut you off. I always say this. I always say 9/11 literally like ended the 90s. When you're coming out of a decade, it's like the morning of 9/11 ended the 90s and it just became a whole new world after that. Not for the better, but a whole new world after that.
I mean, many people can say the same thing too about like the 2010s and obviously the pandemic that we went through. Obviously is another big event that you think about the tragedy that happened in 2001, and then you think about all the young kids and the experiences you went through. And then you got to think about like during the pandemic about the kids that lost their families during that time, obviously different circumstances. But I mean, I'm sure 20 years from now, we'll be having kids that are writing books about their family members too, that who went through that tragedy as well. So talking about 20 years from now with the kids writing books, whatever, where do you see yourself? I'm not going to say 20 years from now because that's a really long time from now.
I'm not talking about that because they only have one white hair.
So how about 10 years from now? Where do you think you see yourself then? Now, hopefully not as many more gray hairs, or more. Hopefully there may be more. Who cares? You got to be proud about the gray hair. But where do you think 10 years from now, where do you think you see yourself?
I don't know. I'm just going to go wherever life takes me. Really, just wherever life takes me. My goal is to be nice and happy. Make lots of memories. I'm just going with the flow of it.
Nice. I think that's kind of the only thing that we can do. This is really go with the flow. Tillie, is there anything else that you'd like to add to this podcast? I mean, I really appreciate everything that you've talked about so far. I mean, it's very admirable that you're brave enough to actually come forward and talk about these stories, because I know there's probably a lot of people out there that just do not want to talk about stuff like this. So I really appreciate your time and the fact that you talk about this. I mean, it really helps. Ultimately, all the people that have suffered losses and people that feel like they don't have a voice. I think in many ways you're giving them that voice that they don't have when you talk about these things and the feelings that you experience. So I gotta thank you for that. But is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just want to thank you for having me on and asking me to do this. And it's hard, but I am totally willing to always go out there and share the history of my dad and the story of that day. And for the younger generation, I feel like it's so important, especially with something like this where they can watch like family members and like really personal experiences with it.
That's awesome. Definitely. Well, Tillie, thanks again. I want to say thank you for being a part of this. I want to say too, cousins for life as well.
That's right.
And I appreciate your time. So thanks.
You're the best.
Thanks. Thank you. You're the best.
Thank you.